Hello everyone, and welcome to Developing Skills and Establishing Pathways into Jobs. This is a Times Higher Education Roundtable held in partnership with Coursera. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Special Projects Editor at THE, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. So as UK universities are put under more pressure than ever before to embed and scale their skills education, it's our aim today to bring together a roundtable of leaders from academia and industry to discuss how higher education can help students meet the requirements of a rapidly changing world of work. I'd like to begin by asking, how can courses and curricula be blended to increase student employability, and what examples anyone might have from their institutions about how they've taken steps to do this so far? Everyone's always quite shy with the first one. Tim, do you mind if we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose there's a spectrum, isn't there, from embedding employability skills into the curriculum in ways that over the last 12 months have had to become increasingly virtualized, digitalized and blended. And that's actually opened up huge opportunities for great numbers of students in terms of the opportunities to take up those virtual placements and virtual engagements. So I guess that's one aspect. Another is the full co-design of curriculum, which has been an element that actually runs through all our degree apprenticeship programs. And I think they've been really pivotal in increasing our understanding of what employers are looking for, not only in terms of the broad employability skills, but actually the types of learning. It's in order to be immediately employment ready, there's a subtle difference between the nature of the curriculum there and the curriculum that we would pursue in a fully embedded program. And then I guess the third tranche I would point to is the increasing creation of employment uplift designed micro credentials and short courses, and I'm sure everyone is engaging in that. I can see a number of colleagues nodding, and that's that's an area of significant growth. So I suppose I would pick on those three areas.
Okay, thank you. For those of you who don't know, Tim's the DVC of Education at the University of Exeter. Tim, I was wondering if I just could ask you a little bit about if there are specific challenges that you've got with Exeter because of your physical place, or what has changed over the course of you moving so much online over the past 18 months or so?
Yeah, I think in terms of broadly across the curriculum, we've taken an approach of embedding or employing recent graduates as digital learning developers, and they've worked alongside all our academic departments to create digital resources to support their academic curriculum. And I think that's a model that we're taking forward into the new academic year, and I can see them working really closely with our employability skills team to create those digital opportunities. But the employability skills team have been the ones who've driven the employment opportunities, the virtual placements, etc. And they went digital pretty much instantly. I suppose because we've got 4 campuses, 2 in Exeter and 2 in Cornwall, we already had quite a well-developed digital infrastructure for the employability offer, because not every student could reach the campus anyway. So that goes off to a head start, I think.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Deborah, I can see you've got your hand raised. Would you like to go next, please?
Thank you. So I'm Deborah Johnston from LSBU, previously from SOAS, which is when I met Tim last, actually. So very different organisations. But just to say, something that we've been doing in LSBU is we've developed a curriculum framework and a skills framework that's, and this will all sound very run of the mill to everybody, but that's supposed to sort of look at what are the shapes of courses and where are the spaces for embedded employability work, but also how does this the skills framework helps people think about how that mapping happens, because of course you're not talking always about unique modules, you're talking about the way that employability, and we haven't even talked about what we mean by that, is embedded in every module or in many modules. But what I wanted to say is, despite having done that, and we did try to base the skills framework on our experience in delivering degree and higher apprenticeships, and I think that's been really interesting and really useful, there's a culture piece that impacts on the way that that unfolds for different disciplines and different courses. So you go through, so certain disciplines have been able to engage with that process very easily and very naturally, because the ways that evidence is constructed and tested, the way that research happens, map really well to, you know, real world issues, and map really well to things that are relevant for employability. Other disciplines find that mapping is really difficult, which is not to devalue it and not to say they're not doing things about employability, but they find it harder to use that kind of framework. And so just to say that's the space we're in, is actually working in those difficult areas right now, which is actually how do you extract the skills, the knowledge, the attributes that are being constructed in courses with a uniform framework. So I think I'll finish at that, and let's see, I'm sure others have got similar experiences.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. Helen, would you like to just tell us about your institution and how this resonates?
Well, Strathclyde has a very practice focus. It's meant to be the place of useful learning as our motto. So we have, similar to what Deborah has explained, it's the idea that external involvement in classes is throughout the curriculum. So we actually have a measure, it's something that we monitor. And the variety of external engagement ranges from guest speakers to placement activity, but actually looking at trying to bring how things are applied in practice into the classroom. So I think it's important it's built in everywhere for us, rather than just being put into specific classes. Having said that, an example from our business school, which every undergraduate student takes, is a series of classes that span over 3 years, which are very much focused on what would be considered employability skills. And it's actually done by using different cases coming from different employers. And it's a particularly useful activity, I think, to broaden our undergraduates' expectation of what business is, because there is quite a significant input from SMEs and third sector, and quite a few of our young people come with quite a narrow view of business and a narrow view of how the discipline can be applied, and it's quite crucial to develop that commercial understanding, and the understanding that it can be beyond a commercial environment. It's public sector, it's third sector, it's trying to understand the business model, even for a charity. So that's very good at getting exposure. And I think that's one of the key things we've learned. It's actually just trying to have as much exposure with external organisations in all of their rich and diverse shapes that really helps the students develop that aspect, particularly of employability skills.
Thank you, Helen. I had a follow-up question. I mean, you talk about the importance of including SMEs and third sector providers. The world of work's undergone a massive disruption at the same time as higher education has. Have you noticed any particular trends that are affecting one sector of work rather than another? And is this having an impact on the skills education that you're now having to provide to students?
I think there is actually an interesting advantage. I would now add into the employability skills the ability to collaborate at a distance. So what we're doing just now has become absolutely central, and how you do that effectively has become very important. And we've been lucky to be able to continue to have external engagement, but just change that mode of engagement. But certainly there are sectors that we would normally be engaged with who have been hit very badly by the lockdown in particular. Glasgow, there's quite a significant hospitality industry, and that's an interesting one. We have actually undergraduate programs in hospitality and tourism management, and it's, that's one of the areas that we've been able to explore. And also understanding, I think, the impact on internationalisation for all of our organisations. So SMEs have been hit quite badly, I think, because of obviously they're just more vulnerable to individual location areas, and certainly the ones that we are involved with at Strathclyde have been hit quite badly in some points.
Has this led to students perhaps considering a broader fields of work or broader ranges of careers than they would have done perhaps when they joined as undergraduates, do you think, if they're seeing the impact of this in real time?
Yes, and I think it's been an interesting view into entrepreneurship and aspects to do with small business work. That's certainly something we would expect students to start to actually have their own view of self-awareness as part of their employability skills. What sort of organisation do they want to work with? Where would they be happy? What would be a good cultural fit for them? And I think obviously what's happened over the last couple of years has also opened up people to the opportunity to work in more flexible ways. So to also consider more part-time work and having multiple roles rather than a more traditional engagement with organisations.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a couple who've got their hand up. So Moira, if we come to you next and then Doug after that.
Thanks, Alistair. Hi, I'm Moira Fishbach-Smith from the University of Glasgow. I was going to make a comment on the kind of framework approach that a few people have mentioned. So we also have a graduate attributes framework. And I think that we found over the years that's worked really well with staff actually, and staff have really engaged with it. We have a set of attributes and we express what that means in terms of the academic dimension, the personal dimension and the transferable dimension. And most of our courses in their learning outcomes have some reference to that. But I think what we found is that the communication with the students has to be quite different. So I think, you know, working with students as partners has a lot of potential here. And, you know, Tim certainly talked about that right at the start, having them work with us to design materials, but also communications plans and raising awareness of actually the skills that are embedded within the courses they already do and how they map onto these key skills that we know employers are looking for is actually, I think, really important. We've got a program called the Graduate Skills Program in one of our colleges, our College of Social Science, which is additional to this, and it's actually run partly by a member of staff and by a team of interns, and they always bring a different perspective to the way that we would approach this within the university. And so I was just really going to say that I think that these types of partnerships, we're certainly expanding them. These paid internships make a huge difference to how we approach the conversation, how we define employability, how we talk about it, and how we promote it. And then just the other thing I was going to mention is the role of advisory boards, because although we would always consult with employers on any new courses or new programs, I think a number of our academic schools are finding that where they have a dedicated advisory board for their discipline, it helps to pick up on some of the things that Helen was talking about. You know, what are the particular challenges and how can we reflect them in the types of internships we have or projects that we create within our programs, and how students can engage with employers more. So I think these types of activity are proving successful and are likely to develop further.
Is the paid internships a long-standing program or something that's relatively recent?
So we have a combination of things. We have something called an internship hub, which is based within our career service, where we advertise paid internships that are offered either by the university or by employers. And then we have a student staff partnership scheme, which we started originally to help us develop our assessment. And we're now rolling that out for students as partners in the curriculum and students as partners in particular in relation to decolonising the curriculum. So we're seeing that as a really useful way to get them involved, a bit like Tim was discussing, and actually helping shape how we think about a course, how we design it, and how we incorporate materials that they can engage with.
Okay, thank you. I mean, and of course, money's not the only factor when you come to looking for a job, but it is an important one and a motivating one. I just had one other question, which was about looking at the greater flexibility and perhaps the more interesting part-time roles that Helen mentioned. Does a paid internship scheme, firstly, does it help sort of demystify the transactional nature of some jobs? And does it also perhaps take a little bit of the stress out of young people being put under more pressure to be more entrepreneurship or to be more entrepreneurial or to expect more disruption and perhaps have to consider multiple roles if they are doing something like a paid internship scheme?
So for us, we have a view that we don't have any unpaid internships in the university. So there's kind of anything we offer the students an opportunity to do I think legally we're obliged to pay them for that anyway. So that's important. It's not just an incentive, it's recognition that they're actually doing work in partnership with us. And I think it goes beyond that to say that they are actually partners. They're working as a partner with an academic in thinking about their learning experience. And certainly it does help. It helps with students who, for many sectors, certainly in Glasgow and during lockdown, and everyone will have experienced that, the availability of part-time work diminished rapidly. So I think opportunities to create internships that compensate to some extent for that and help us improve learning and teaching is beneficial all round.
Great, thank you, Moira. Doug, thank you for holding on. I'd like to ask you about Nottingham-Trent and just the challenges that you're facing, and what you feel have been the most effective strategies that you've employed so far, no pun intended, and also what the challenges that persist.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. So thanks everybody. Yes, I'm Doug Cole, Deputy Director of Employability at Nottingham-Trent. Been here about 3 years, and actually what I also wanted to do was kind of refer to some previous work I've done, which I think is quite applicable now. And I think I wanted to kind of take us back a little bit and actually ask us to start really think about what are we actually focusing on and why. What are employability skills? And what informs the activity we're all doing? What's the research that underpins all of this? So sorry, I'm answering your question with more questions here, but listening to all the speakers so far, it's been fascinating. But for me, and this is work I've worked on in other institutions and now kind of working on NTU, there's so much more of a need to focus on more durable personal qualities, attitude, behavior. It's really not all about skills. Skills is the wrong term for us to be using. We've been talking about the skills since the 1960s with Robbins' report and the Leash Review and everything else that's come out. And here we are 60 years later, still talking about skills. And there's something that's not computing, there's something that's not translating. And to be successful takes technical skills, absolutely. But what about the kind of people we're developing? And I think once I'm obsessed and I'm a real geek around the language of employability. Once you start to position and frame this in a different way and shift the narrative to being more learning focused, we have a chance of doing things at scale. And that's been referred to here. There's always going to be fantastic examples of what we did in particular subjects or disciplines or with a particular cohorts of students. What I'm interested in is how do we do it for all students across a whole institution. So I spent the last 10 years looking at, and based on my own research as well, looking at frameworks that are flexible enough to be contextualized at the course level. So moving away from university graduate attributes to kind of what do we want to see from that course? What kind of people are we seeking to develop? And help painting those pictures at that course level, and then at scale helping then every single student, no matter what their background, reflect and contextualize and make sense of that, to personalize it. So we have this much more fluid notion of what employability is and what it means, and what is the knowledge, like I said, the attitude, the behavior, the technical skills that are necessary to support them for the future. So I mean, at NTU we've got a really strong foundation with every course. We had a curriculum refresh initiative that's been running for a number of years now, where every course has to embed careers education, experience, and synoptic assessment, a reflective practice task. So there's some really good foundations in there, but that's far from being employability. So we're building on that, and we're developing that further, and we're just piloting a new taxonomy we've developed with a number of courses which really focus on these more durable qualities, not just the knowledge and the technical skills, but these other aspects and outcomes of learning. And I think what I'm really keen on is we shift that spotlight slightly away from this skills narrative. I know it would never happen. The government and the media, it's all they talk about, but we're missing a trick. And there's so many other offshoots, things I could talk about. I'll stop though, but yeah, really.
Well, Doug, thank you, Doug. It's really interesting to hear that you've been working on this for so long and the patterns that you've seen emerge so far. I just had one other question, which was that, do you think as there's more disruption to the workforce ahead, this process will speed up and the diversity will speed up in terms of the type of people that universities have to educate, much in the same way that the rapid shift to online enable people to deliver things that they've been banging the drum for and were told, oh no, it's going to take 5 years to shift that to online, and people were doing it in 6 weeks or 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the disconnect with the literature has been happening for over a decade. We've had literature over a decade telling us what kinds of areas of learning we should be focusing on. So we've got labour market intelligence, and that's fantastic, but there's a body of research that hasn't been looked at. And so for me, the pandemic has if you like, amplified the need to look at this, accelerated it, if you like, that we need to develop people who are prepared to go out into that future and complex and unknown world where we don't know what the jobs of tomorrow look like. We don't know what the skills of tomorrow will look like, but with the right attitude as lifelong learners, being proactive, having the self-efficacy and belief that they can continue to learn and continue to develop as people to adapt and be agile within. People will have multiple jobs. We know already that people will not have a job for life. They'll have multiple jobs and they'll have multiple careers. That's been a thing way before the pandemic. And I think, if anything, the pandemic's probably accelerated and amplified that. So it's even more important we now get back to basics and really ask ourselves, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What informs that? And we're in the world of higher education. We should be looking at the research that underpins this. And across the sector, broadly speaking, I don't believe we are. So there, I'm being provocative perhaps, but
no, it's fine.
There.
That's brilliant. John, Helen, I'll come to you in just a moment. I just wanted to bring in Martin at this point, who's one of the partnership directors at Coursera, because just to pick up on a couple of things that Doug said, I know from having heard your colleagues at Coursera speak in the past, the type of human skills, shall we call them, or soft skills are an area of interest in terms of what you track across a platform that has almost 90 million users now. And also the other thing to mention about Coursera is, of course, that you provide a platform for campus, but also for business too. So you are tracking both the world of work and how higher education is massively changing at the moment. How much of what Doug picked up on about the right skills not necessarily being focused on, or certain metrics being ignored, do you see people shifting in real time to address that with the kind of flexibility that they're building in using the Coursera platform now?
We certainly do, yes. And thanks for bringing me in on that, actually, because like we say, we're in a very unique position with nearly 90 million learners, with over 6,000 institutions partnering with us across the world. We've got access to an incredible amount of data and insight into what business is actually requiring. And quite frankly, we're hearing time and time again from many of our businesses that we're working with that really the graduates are going, when they're receiving graduates, they haven't really got the skills that they need to be able to hit the ground running. So we're partnering over 3,000 businesses across the world who do the likes of Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, Google, etc. They're launching a lot of their own internal programs to help to support this, and also creating their own certifications that many institutions across the world are starting to embed into their programs. I'm not sure whether anybody on this call at your universities are doing this already, but what we're seeing much more across, particularly across the Asia, Africa, the Middle East, is that those institutions are embedding up to 30% of external content from other providers and from industry content too into their curriculums. And that's really kind of making a difference that they see and making their learners more employable. So it's a really sort of changing landscape. The UK seems to be lagging behind in this sense in many ways. It's still really within its infancy. So we're having many conversations at the moment with universities in the UK who I think probably are what Doug says, really kind of providing those human skills, but are really not kind of embedding some of the the industry skills that businesses are requiring. So what we're talking really about, like sort of artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, those kind of key emerging technologies where there's a lot of skills gaps out there and a lot of jobs which are going unfilled. We find that many institutions find it difficult to be able to adapt their curriculums quickly and easily to be able to sort of meet those needs.
Thank you, Martin. Sorry, I'm struggling with a cold, so I'm trying to unmute and cough in the right order. It's very important. John, if we can come to you next, and then Helen, and then Tim, please.
Okay, thank you, Alistair. So I'm John Barrow, Dean from Employability and Entrepreneurship at the University of Aberdeen. And what you were saying, Doug, is music to my ears. I think that, you know, we have well, just about to start actually a review of our graduate attributes, which you know, even just that term alone, I think is possibly a bit challenging. You know, for me, I think it's about the skills that students are able to pick up throughout their learner journey, really, as a particularly undergraduate student, but actually any student who joins us. it's more than just you know, these particular skills, as you're saying, Doug. I think it goes far beyond that. And you know, going back to kind of the blended approach to the sort of start of this conversation, I think having you know, particular programs or particular aspects of curricula that students are able to do online gives a huge amount of flexibility. So linking to what you're saying there, Martin, around kind of being agile, I think you know, we offer huge amounts of choice in terms of courses, but actually that's not particularly flexible. I think if it's delivered online, you have a much more flexible curriculum that gives some space within that curriculum for students to actually you know, gain some of those employability skills, whether that is within courses as part of programs, or whether actually it's within their wider life, you know, within other aspects, part-time work they're doing outside of the university, and how we can actually recognize that as an institution. So one of the things that we have changed, actually, we have going back to when our graduate attributes first started 10 years ago, it was so it's a program called Students Taking Active Roles Star Award. And that allowed students who had defined roles to actually apply, demonstrate certain qualities and skills, and then gain gold, silver, bronze kind of level of these awards. We've now changed that to open it up so that actually, regardless of what those students are actually taking part in, could be something part of their curriculum, could be something linked to student association work, could be internships, could be something they do on a weekend, as long as it's able to actually meet the criteria and link back to our graduate attributes, which, as I say, I have a maybe slight issue with, and we're going to hopefully address that soon. You know, it will allow those students to evidence some of that, be reflective, look back on, you know, how they're actually being able to use those skills in a wider context than just within their degree program.
Sorry, thank you, John, and thank you, Doug, also for clarifying in the chat box too. John, I just wanted to ask to Martin's point about the difficulty for responding quickly to gaps in highly skilled jobs with emerging technology like AI. Is there any way to manage a reasonable timescale to scale and change those curriculums and embed them to teach students what they need in order to fill those roles?
Good question. I think it's, I mean, you know, I suppose many people will describe institutions as, you know, super tankers that take one hell of a long time to turn or stop or change direction. And I do think that I suppose for those emerging technologies, it's trying to get, I suppose, a context for them when they're not within disciplines such as computing science, for example. You know, I think it's a relatively easy sell if you're trying to convince the head of school for computing science that that, you know, you should maybe focus on AI more than other things at the moment. That becomes far more challenging if you're looking at someone who's working in, you know, politics or social sciences, or and it's trying to find, I suppose, a context that makes it relevant for the students. Without that, you're pretty much dead in the water, I think. So so that would be the biggest challenge, which doesn't really answer your question, does it?
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. And quickly, Helen, I'm sorry for making you right. I just want to ask Martin one question about the Coursera platform. In terms of the way that people are building their own curricula now by pulling in courses from different universities, does that, I mean, it's a very difficult problem to solve, as John says, but does that in some way start to address how you can at least try to build curricula quicker or expedite multidisciplinary learning? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, because we've got over 5,500 courses from institutions right across the world, probably in the top, well, definitely in the top 500 rankings, and you're able to then pick and choose content and pull that into your courses in a very agile way. So we are updating these courses on a regular basis. The technology is advancing extremely quickly. It's not, we recognize it, it's not an easy process to be able to stay at the cutting edge of technology around these emerging skills around AI and data science, etc. But we are doing that, and our partners are informing us and keeping that content bang up to date all the time. So we believe that, you know, the degree is certainly here to stay. students still want to gain a degree. But in many instances, they also can make themselves more employable by receiving industry certifications from the likes of IBM and Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc., where they can differentiate themselves from other learners as well. And faculty and can then also make sure that the content is continuously up to date and meeting the skills that industry requires.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Helen, apologies for making you wait. I was just wondering if we could get your thoughts on this, and also the effective structures for delivery for making curriculum more interdisciplinary, and perhaps, you know, as John said, trying to get people in atypical subjects for new technology to be interested in what's emerging and how that's impacting the world of work.
I think we actually have a really interesting opportunity now. Something that we'd done at Strathclyde prior to the pandemic was to introduce an online module focused around the UN sustainability goals. And it was a multidisciplinary module open to any student from the different faculties involved. And it was actually constructed pedagogically so that they were working in multidisciplinary teams. And that was part of the objective of it, to work with different disciplines and to better understand that and bring their own subject. That was one of the things that the students had to do, you know, was to bring their own subject, but also to work with others from different perspectives to bring that through. And it's interesting because we did this prior to the pandemic, but there was interesting perspectives from full-time students at the idea of doing an online course while attending university full-time. And there was a little bit of hesitancy to make use of an online module in that context, but it was very important it was online, because we all know from timetabling and everything else, there's a lot of complications in offering multidisciplinary opportunities for study. And I think one of the things that's going to be a positive from the pandemic is that our learners have experience of online learning now, regardless of the way that they've chosen their modes of engagement with higher education. And I think the appetite to include fully online modules and some of the opportunities that Martin's highlighted is now going to be much more viable for full-time undergraduate or full-time courses that would have previously. Part of it is also, it's the taste of the learners themselves. It's what there is an appetite for that we have to work with as well. And part of what we were doing prior to the pandemic was educating on how online isn't a light version or a less effective version of face-to-face. It's a different way of learning. And I think we now have that opportunity to expand out. And that's certainly what we're doing at Strathclyde. So we're now looking at suites of electives and things like big data, AI, data science. These are all key things that you don't have to understand. You don't have to understand big data from a technical perspective, but I would argue you need to understand what it can do for organizations rather than how it does that. And I would say that is very much the focus, I think, for some of these emerging areas that can help attract our students to take them as optional electives across a wide range of different courses.
Brilliant, thank you, Helen. Tim, if we come to you next, Helen raised an interesting point about the difference between teaching the what and teaching the how, and how this might help embed multidisciplinary learning and other types of learning that perhaps people find unpalatable or they're a bit apprehensive about doing. You know, this is talk about staff as well as students. How is the nature of how courses are being put together and multidisciplinary study changing in your experience?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think there's a lot wrapped up in the conversation that we've just had to this point. I think I'll try and reflect on your question as well.
Sorry, yeah, no, there's about 5 talking points at any one point when we get going. It's the way.
I think just in terms of the sort of platforms like Coursera, and I mean, we've gone with LinkedIn Learning as part of the offer to students during the pandemic, recognizing the need for all the students to be able to say, well, okay, how do I pick up how do I pick up specific skills without being able to walk into the study skills centre or to go to the other on-site services? And that's that's an experiment in that approach. And I think platforms like Coursera really democratise access to learning and allow students to personalise their experience in a way that's not been seen before. So in terms of meeting the sort of skills, the specific skills that employers say they're looking for at the moment, around some of the data skills, then platforms like Coursera, FutureLearn, other platforms exist. They're going to be critical, aren't they? And actually, I'm sure they're going to be part of the mix for the independent learner, but probably also embedded more into a personalised on-campus experience as well. And I think that the other side of that sort of looking at the skills needs of employers is all those areas that they've identified as resilience, communication, creativity. There was an interesting bit of QS work done recently asking employers which skills and attributes they think will get overtaken by AI by 2030. And the ones they thought were most likely to be overtaken were analytical, technical, problem solving, even depth of knowledge, which is a bit scary for universities because we sort of teach that stuff. And the ones that they thought would be least likely to be overtaken are creativity, resilience, interpersonal leadership, and negotiating skills. So I think that gets to your question about the how as well as the what of what we're teaching, and I think that really speaks to the full spectrum university teaching right the way across HASS and STEM. It's not as though we need to focus all our teaching into a particular area, but we need to be thinking about the pedagogy of our offer, so that we know that we are developing those core skills, and that students have got the ability to tap into the areas of particular expertise. And of course, with programs like QSTEP, which brings data analysis and social sciences together, there are some great examples where there's already models of that sort of interdisciplinarity. I think one of the big changes of the last 18 months, of course, is also that our academics have had a crash course in online pedagogy. There've been more conversations about pedagogy in the last 18 months than probably in the previous, I'd say 18 years, maybe 180 years, I don't know. So people are actually talking about, how do students learn? What's the process? What we're doing about it? And we started by asking people with experience of blended and online learning to write a set of design principles for everybody to use, institutional design principles that could be were short enough that I could ask everybody in the institution to read them. I don't know whether we got there, but it was a pretty pithy document. And then we asked departments to take those design principles and write their own departmental take on those design principles. And I think that's really led to quite a flourishing of those sorts of conversations. And I think if you put those threads together, the platforms, the flexibility of learners then wanting to be more personalize their experience more, and the fact that our academic communities become much more conversant with different modalities of learning, I think there is rich opportunities. But we've all been working at such a flat out pace, I don't think we've quite got our heads around what the picture will look like in the future.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Martin, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I thought it might be interesting just to sort of mention that I'm working quite closely with a number of new and innovative providers who are kind of saying they're offering an alternative to higher education. They are starting off with a job role and then doing a backwards design and sort of backwards engineering the curriculum to fit a particular job role. So students would be able to say, I want to go into this particular job, and these are the skills that you'll need to actually become a software engineer, for example, or a cybersecurity expert or a technology leader. And those providers are then looking for content providers like Coursera to be able to fill that gap and fill those needs. So they're kind of like flipping the HE model. I just thought that might be interesting to mention, see if anybody's got any comments about that.
Thank you. Mark, can we bring in you? Sorry, I don't want to pick on you, but I'm keen to get your input on this and just how models are changing and how you've been able to respond to them so far at Keele, and what you think of the external pressures of other providers emerging who might build themselves as rivals to the traditional degree structure in higher education, how that might impact on how universities need to respond.
Yeah. I mean, in some respects, I haven't got a whole amount to add to a lot of the kind of broad consensus with a lot of what's been said already, and I think particularly resonate with the comments around the need to have had to move online over the last 18 months for all academic staff and students, and that has opened up opportunities around. So we're actually in this space where, and it has been kind of mentioned similarly already, but we're starting next year some global challenge pathways that will effectively be electives, very much with a focus on skills and employability. That will be entirely online, but will be taken by students who are physically on campus and having anything from 10 to 30 hours face-to-face teaching a week. But they will also, alongside that, be doing the global challenge pathways longitudinal through all 3 years. There'll be six pathways for them to choose from, and that's really something that we've evolved the thinking around that. We're already going to start doing it, but the pandemic and the switch to students being used to studying online and academic staff used to delivering online has enabled us to kind of redesign, rethink how we're going to deliver that, and that offers a lot of timetabling advantages and things like that as well.
Sorry, is there generally an appetite to adopt those new models? Has it been something that has been relatively, well, nothing's easy to set up when you're forced to shift everything online, but is it something where there's been a strong appetite for students to embrace those new kind of pathways?
Yeah, our experience is that students still predominantly we're a campus university, they want a campus-based face-to-face experience, but they also recognise the additionality that can come from online that can enhance that experience. And so it's predominantly a face-to-face campus-based experience, but with kind of the added value around things like employability by using online delivery, online resources. I mean, again, hearing Tim talk about Exeter, when you've got four different campuses, obvious advantages around delivering some things online when they're kind of what one might call institutional level activities.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask Deborah about this too, because London South Bank has a very strong record of sort of reaching out into its communities and different types of cohorts in order to boost employability. With all the sort of moving targets that universities are required to hit now, when it comes to something like employability that is a political issue as well as a pedagogical one, are you generally optimistic that things are moving in the right direction? You know, Tim also spoke about just the sheer effort that's required to brief everyone in an organisation so that they feel comfortable working to a particular strategic goal.
So I think you've hit on a really important point, Alistair, and actually let's be a bit controversial. I always like to do that a little bit, but just to say that, you know, there's a challenge now. So we've been talking about employability as something that has a long time horizon. We've questioned whether we know what it means, but we think it's about the ability to, you know, be resilient. We think it's about the ability to kind of deal with the unexpected and to transition well. And so we've been building, I'd say, a longer term and deeper definition of what it is we're trying to achieve. At the same time, the challenge that we all know is that we've got those regulatory discussions around a metric that's 15 months after you graduate and you're in a skilled job. So there's a really interesting thing about conversations within the academy itself, you know, with academic colleagues about actually what is it we're trying to do? Are we trying to hit those graduate outcome figures, or are we trying to actually develop that deeper, more varied set of attributes that we want for our students? And of course, sometimes those involve exactly the same activities and thinking, and sometimes they don't. And, you know, and so there's a really important framing point. But if I can sort of so if we think of that as the context, this challenge of different views about actually what are we trying to do, what is employability, and actually bringing all colleagues into that space where they're able to navigate these different discussions is challenging. But I'd say the other side of it, and I'd want to bring it in for this conversation, is I think particularly in LSBU, we're challenged by the fact that we have a really diverse group of learners. We have a lot of part-time students. We have a lot of students who are full-time, but who have got, caring responsibilities, who are, working significantly outside. And that's where some of the challenges around extracurricular skills and employability focused work it's really difficult. And so we're making decisions to have things credit bearing and embedded as much as possible. And I know all of those words have got questions about what's embedded, right? We could have a 1 hour discussion about what that means. So but actually that's really encouraged us to think that we've got to make sure that this is in our core delivery, because we have groups of learners who don't have the time to do that extra course. And so we have to, so if we're saying to them, look, this is valuable, we have to have it valued through it being credit bearing. And that's challenging in its own way, because then it's got to work with that, particularly we have a lot of PSRB regulated courses. Does it fit with that framework? So yeah, there are lots of challenges with how you think about, how you operationalize this, especially when your external targets are moving and are maybe a bit more short-termist than the way we've been talking about employability.
Thank you. I think that's very well articulated. Doug, we'll come to you next then, Helen. I mean, Doug, I think I have an inkling of what you might want to talk about based on your comments in the chat, which is just if I could ask a leading question, it's how do we counteract all the opportunities that to deliver different types of learning that help to boost employability without completely overloading the individuals involved, the staff and the students?
Okay, so I mean, that plays to the point I put in the chat around the kind of acknowledging, recognizing, raising awareness, if you like, around this concept of life-wide learning, and which has been around for some time, and has real value. Norman Jackson, Ron Barnett, others have written around this space, has real value to the world of employability. It wasn't written for employability, but has real value now to look at this again and go, how do we recognize learning that's happening in multiple spaces across the student's life at any given point in time, because it goes well beyond the formal classroom. And obviously the pandemic, being a distance learner, being mature, all of these like life experiences and contexts that all our students are coming from is bringing learning and different outcomes of learning, and a lot of learning that is actually supporting them in these personal qualities and these human factors, if you like, that I'm saying are so important and moves us beyond this notion of skills. So yeah, so I think that's partly kind of answering your point. I had another point in my mind, and that was just building on what Deborah was saying there around, there's still confusion around the terms employment and employability, and it's muddied by the obsession with metrics, league tables that call themselves employability league tables and aren't employability league tables. Let's be clear, some of these things they're either static snapshots of employment, and when we talk about employability, what we're actually talking about is the things that ultimately are underpinning that and that ability to secure jobs. So we need to get under the skin of the metrics, which are there, and there's a lot of good information in there, but actually what impacts that, what works. And as a sector, we don't know what works. All we track is really placements, and we've demonstrated the correlation between placement activity and graduate outcomes, and what was Delhi before destinations. And so you can prove that correlation. I'm not trying to say we want to, we can prove cause and effect, we can't, but we do need to start tracking other things, other types of activity we're doing, particularly now in a digital space. How do you develop resilience or empathy or emotional intelligence with someone that you aren't physically in the room with? How do we do that? Digital is another side, separate conversation. Employability is woven through all of this, and maybe employability is not even the right word. It's learning and teaching, isn't it? This is all about learning and teaching in different contexts. And if we position it in that way, frame it in that way, we have a chance of engaging all staff, because we're all in that business, aren't we? We're all in this together. It's not the job of the Careers and Employability Service. So I think there's an opportunity with the challenges we're facing now, there's an opportunity to mainstream this much more just by speaking about it in a different way. So sorry I didn't answer your question fully, but had a few things on my mind I wanted to get off my chest.
That's absolutely fine. I had a quick question, which is I heard this point when I interviewed a senior leader earlier this year, where she said that sometimes we collect information and call it data. Was that sort of similar to the point you're making, that sometimes what is held up as a study is in fact a snapshot?
Yeah, I think the metrics that we have, like I said, they don't tell the full picture. There's so many variables that impact on that point where a student secures that first job or that second job. There's so many variables there, and you can't quantify all of them, but certainly we could at least aspire to try and figure out if there's a correlation between different things that we're already doing. And the law clinics, where they're not out on a placement, they're doing a law, they're on campus working with live clients on campus. It's not a placement. Are we tracking where those students go? Or live projects, mentoring, all these other things which bring the student directly into contact with employers? How are we capturing that? So I think I'm a qualitative guy. I might be coming across as opposed to a quantitative person, but the numbers are here, they're not going away, but you need both. We need to really, as a sector, unpack and explore what works, because otherwise we're just going to keep doing a load of random things which are good, but they're still random.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Helen, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I would come in to argue that if we're talking about employability skills, to see the bigger picture, we need to consider tertiary education as a whole. And I would argue that the pedagogy that you referenced earlier, the idea that we are training people for the job, their first job that they're going to get post-graduation, is actually more of an FE than an HE aspect. And in HE, I see it as we are training people for their career. And we're training people to make sure that they're on a trajectory to get to where they want to be 5 years in to their first job. So there's a lot of different things that we're trying to do there. And that personal or professional development planning is integral in getting them to own that development process and develop those things overall. So I would argue we aren't, and you can question the metrics that are then used to measure the sector. But I think we are meant to be educating and developing people for a career. And I think also another element to consider is when you look at what's happened within degree apprenticeships and graduate apprenticeships, and quite a lot of the standards and frameworks were developed for quite narrow job specifications, and then actually weren't used and were scrapped because they were too narrow. Because when we are having discussions with organisations and looking at the development, the co-development of content for apprenticeship degrees, we're not asking them what you want them to be able to do when they finish, but we're wanting to know where they're intending them to go in their career. So what's the talent management pipeline? And trying to prepare that overall journey that Doug's referring to. Higher education is much more than about the content of the classes. It's about developing people, the critical thinking skills, metacognition, the self-efficacy. And I think, if anything, the pandemic's really brought home the need for resilience. So for me, these things pull together.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. I'd like to bring in Martin at this stage just to ask about, again, the Coursera platform, just because it's so large and you're gathering data in real time about very diverse cohorts, very international cohorts, people who are using it for different reasons and for different lengths of time. Do you think that looking ahead, there will be metrics and there will be patterns that you will be able to pick out that simply are not evident at the moment because of the flurry of activity there's been and the migration to online learning over the past 18 months has almost kind of created a bottleneck where it will take a little while for more trends and patterns to emerge that might be useful to people who are trying to deal with the type of problems that Doug and Helen most recently articulated?
Yeah, very much so. I don't know the official figure, but I believe it's around 30 to 40 million extra learners have come onto the platform in the last 18 months to 2 years. It's probably no surprise. A lot of institutions were scrabbling to find online resources and came to Coursera, and we made the platform free during that period for institutions. And obviously free always does attract a lot of people, and we continued that afterwards, and all the institutions in the UK and many of them already are able to sign up for free via our platform, and we can send that information on to you afterwards. Yeah, we've gathered an incredible amount of data during that time, not just on what the skills are required and what people are learning and what job roles they're going into, but really about how people learn online and the pedagogies behind that too. So, with 87 million learners plus, we've got an incredible amount of insight. I think it's probably fair to say in the early days of MOOCs that the completion rates were pretty low, but people weren't paying for those programs. They were taking it in their own time. They were probably already doing a full-time course or in a full-time employment. They may well have been dropping into the platform just to learn about one particular topic or subject area. But now we're seeing the completion rates to be much higher when they're part of a program of study. So yes, I think it will take some time to unpack all this data and information, but I think we've already got some incredible insights that we can share. We publish an annual report each year, our academic Coursera for Campus report for 2021 is due to publish any time now, so I can send that on to the group afterwards, and it will be very interesting to see what we've found during this period. But one thing's for sure is that the UK is lagging behind many of our European neighbours when it comes to key technology skills around what I've talked about previously, around technology, AI, data science. It's very surprising actually when you look at the skills matrix and the research that we've done. We are very low down, probably around position 30 to 60 European countries. We'd think we would be much higher, but we're not. And it's that kind of information which is really kind of quite alarming, really, and is driving a lot of the conversations that we're having at the moment.
Thank you, Martin. We've got about 4 minutes left to be precise. Moira, I wanted to ask you a question about just sort of the leveling off effect that we might be able to anticipate with digital learning and teaching as we transition to another phase where people do have more freedom of movement to move around physically, campuses are allowed to reopen, blended learning programs become more bespoke by their institutions. Do you think that there's less of a cause for concern over too much being pushed for online, and that the in-person teaching will come back to play a more important role, particularly around things like employability, where we're talking about a lot of the human skills that people need to learn in order to make themselves truly attractive to employers?
So a few of us have said before the pandemic, so I'll start my sentence with before the pandemic, we were already committed to using our teaching spaces, our campus spaces differently, and I've made some fairly significant investments in that. And it's not instead of online. I think the thing is, it's about how do we bring the physical and digital environments together and integrate them much more. So we talk about learning and we support that in different ways, but it's an integrated approach. It's not a choice. So that, I think for me, that's in part what blended learning means, but it's supported by a much more active learning pedagogy. So, using online opportunities where they make sense to do so, and we've seen really good engagement with students in large groups, far more interactive online than they would have been if you had them in a physical space in many cases. But equally, really rethinking how do we use our physical spaces so that students can work in groups. And we've been fortunate at Glasgow to have been investing in youth and a new teaching hub that has exactly those kinds of spaces, group learning spaces that hold 380 students where they can work in groups, they can share the work that they're working on through kind of screen sharing, where we can have teaching teams, where we can have skills support, and effective learning advisors in the room. That's giving us an opportunity, I think, to really change the pedagogy and change how we teach. So I think what we'll look at is how do we absolutely make the best of the time we have with students when we are all physically co-located, and how do we use technology in that setting, but equally how do we make sure that we embrace all of the affordances technology allows so that learning can be flexible and support. Deborah talked about the diverse student population. We all have diverse student populations with a whole range of needs, and technology allows them that flexibility and choice. So really, I think it's about how we bring that together in a meaningful way, and not to have sort of parallel streams. And I think that's where we will turn our attentions a lot more, and we're doing before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic's probably accelerated that.
Great, thank you very much. That brings us precisely up to time, so that's 1 hour. I'd like to thank all of you for taking part today. As someone noted, we did get through an awful lot in 60 minutes, I think, quite often having parallel conversations about the same thing. But thank you all very much for giving us examples of best practice from your institutions, and talking about the similarities and the difference. It's always very interesting to hear leaders speak about those things. As I said, there will be an on-demand version of this recording on the THE website, along with an article containing the key takeaways from the discussion that we hope you find useful, and is of course shareable should you wish to share it. So thank you again for taking part. Thank you to Marston and Coursera for partnering with us for this event, and we hope to be able to engage with you at future THE events. Thank you very much. Goodbye.